All right, it looks like everyone's able to see it. So we are looking at 4 C's of communication. Now, to be honest with you, if you go out and Google 4 C's of communication, you might find 4 C's of communication. You might find 6 C's or 7 C's or 20 C's. There is no hard and fast how many C's in communication there are. It's a device that writing teachers will use to help you focus on a few key elements. My thought is once you start getting into 6, 7, 8 principles, it gets to be too much. And so I've put together a handout for the 4 C's of communication that encapsulates some big picture ideas, and it will help us look at how we can improve our writing instantly by just looking at these 4 basic principles. And what I want to do is walk through this handout that you see. I'm not going to read it. It's on our website. You can go in there and read it. But I want to at least highlight some of the key elements and kind of talk about what we mean. And I think this might help answer some questions, and then we'll try to apply it later on with an exercise. So the 4 C's that I've put together, and I'll run through them quickly, and so you can see. Number 1 is complete. Number 2 is concise. Number 3 is clear. And number 4 is consistent. And I put them there in that order because I think this is the order that it is effective for you to walk through. So when we talk about complete, one of the first things that I do when I write any kind of email or memo or a report or anything, I think about what all do I need to say? If I'm asking someone to come and speak to a class, what information do I need to give that person? I need to give them the date that I'm asking. I need to give them the time. Even more specific, not just what time does the class start, but maybe I want that person to come for a specific half-hour or 20-minute section. So when would that person come? How many people are in the class? How do we operate the class? Do I want that person to go in person, or do I want that person to come in via Skype or via Zoom? There's a lot of information just on the logistical speaking in front of the class. And then there's the topic. And chances are I've asked the person to speak in class about a topic that person is an expert on, but what specifically? So yes, you're a social media expert. Naturally, I would want you to come and talk to the class about social media, but what in particular? Do I want to know how students use social media? Do I want to know how businesses use social media to communicate knowledge? Or do I want to know how businesses use social media to market to clients, to consumers? There are all these different nuances, and all of that information has to go into this email. Otherwise, I'm going to create a situation where I email the person, that person has to email me back and get additional information, and then I have to email back and they email back, and we end up spending more time, and one of us, if not both of us, ends up getting frustrated. All because we didn't add information in that should have been. So I put together some basic questions that you should ask when you are writing anything. If it's an email to a professor, if it's an email to a client, if you're writing material for job application, and you could think of these same things with your resume, whatever you're working on. Ask yourself, what do I have to convey? What are the 5 things that I have to say? I need to make sure that all 5 of these elements are in there. What piece? And I'm not talking sentences. I'm talking just 2-3 words in terms of idea. I need to say time, I need to say location, whatever. What is it you want to achieve? At the end of this, are you asking somebody for something? Are you trying to get them information that they can use? Are you trying to get verification from them? Are you trying to persuade them? What are you trying to do? Because that's going to determine what kind of information you need to put in there. Always think to yourself, what does the reader think or know already? So if it's a guest speaker who has come to speak to my class before, I can easily say we'd be in the same room as last time, and I'd love you to speak on the same subject, because I know that that person already has been in there. Where somebody new needs a lot more detail about that class before that person will come in. So what does the reader know already? What does the reader think about that? Do they like the subject? You're writing to your supervisor about an idea. Have you heard your supervisor say before that she likes that idea and you're trying to tell her now how to implement it? Or is she maybe against it and you know that you're going to have to add some information in there to overcome objections that you've heard her say in the past? And what else is that person going to want to know? And these are things you can't know for certain, right? There isn't a scientific way, but you want to say, if I was in the reader's situation, what would I want to know? What questions would I have? You have to try to guess. You have to understand your reader, and you have to think. And I know this sounds like a lot, but I tell you, if you think about this before you even send a short email, you will find that one short email will suffice. And if you don't think about it, you'll find that you have many emails going back and forth, and it's hard to keep track, and people get frustrated. And I saw this ordinance. I was teaching another class, and I had looked at this ordinance, and I thought this was a terrific example. So this is an ordinance where they are talking about motorized golf course, and this ordinance determines sort of when you can use them and the legality of driving a golf cart on a city street, right? So that's what this ordinance says. And it says the following is used to have the meaning stated. So it defines motorized golf cart means a golf cart having at least 4 wheels, either electric or gas. Designated roadways means city streets and avenues. So when we say a golf cart can drive on the city streets, we mean this kind of cart, and we mean on these kind of city streets. And what's interesting is this piece that's highlighted. I can just imagine either somebody asking the question or the writer thinking, okay, wait, we've talked about streets and avenues. Is somebody going to assume that they can now ride a golf cart on this highway? Let's just put a line in there. Let's anticipate the reader's questions. Let's make sure this is complete. This does not mean that you can drive a golf cart on this Minnesota highway. You have to anticipate what the reader's thinking, how they might interpret the information. Sometimes it means you add more information. Sometimes it means you add a word. Sometimes it means you're just more clear with your sentence. But the first step is getting everything into a piece of communication. Everything has to be in there. Okay, now we've got all this information. And it doesn't mean you have to make a list or an outline, but in your head, you should at least say, okay, I got to hit these 3 points. Then once you have all that information, then you move to say, okay, am I being wordy? Yes, I want a lot of information, but I don't need a lot of words to convey a lot of information. So for example, I might be able to use a consistent bullet list type system where when I talk about emailing someone as a guest speaker to come to class, I can say something like, the class information is below, so you can see if it fits with your schedule. And then I'll just say time, and then I'll have the time. And I'll say date, and I'll say location. And I might even have, if it's an email, a link to a map so that I don't have to, I can say the hall or whatever and have a link that goes there so that person can go and get further information without it being in this email. There are ways that I can cut it down to be more concise. And so we're not looking with conciseness at cutting out ideas. We're looking at cutting out words. And this is where we talk about that idea of brevity versus conciseness. When we talk about brevity, it just means short. It means quick. Say it in as few words as possible, but it doesn't mean that you're saying everything. Conciseness means you are being complete. You are getting all of the ideas out of there, but you're using as few words as possible. Brevity just means you're short. You might talk for 30 seconds, but you haven't really said all the details. Completeness means I've said everything, but I've cut out the unnecessary words. I've tried to use bullets where possible to help make them stand out more with fewer words. And so that's the difference. Sometimes people are brief, but they don't really provide all the information. I'll be there to pick you up around 6. Well, does around 6 mean before or after 6? Does it mean that I will be there in a car and you should look for this car? Does it mean I'll swing around the front of your building, or I'll come up on the side, or I'll park and walk up and see you? There's a lot more information that can go in there. It doesn't mean we need a full paragraph, but we might need to add 4 more words to that sentence, still be concise and complete, and get beyond the brevity. And so hopefully that helps explain the difference between those. Brevity just means short. It doesn't mean you're actually giving information. Now, in order to be concise, to achieve conciseness, there are a few tips. Cut unnecessary words. Look for modifiers. Anytime you see something like the final outcome, outcome means final. So of course it's final. If it's perfectly clear, clear means that it's perfectly clear. There is no, it's clear or it's not clear. So we can cut off things like perfectly and final. If we have sentences that say it is clear that blah, 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 just cut off it is clear that. Due to the fact that there are, whenever we see these kinds of words, you almost can always just cut them right off the sentence and start right after that. Because we're sort of using words to warm up the ideas in our heads. Sometimes as writers, that first draft is not going to be perfect. And so we can go back and cut out the words that the reader doesn't actually need. And then simple gobbledygook. Payment to which subcontractors are entitled should be made promptly. Pay vendors promptly. Right? We could say that in a few words. Instead of payments to which subcontractors are entitled, pay vendors promptly. Sometimes it means cutting out words, sometimes it means replacing words, sometimes it means flipping words around. But these are some of the things to look for: cutting these modifiers, expletives, and gobbledygook. Avoid redundancies. This is a common sentence that you'll see, and part of this is because we want to be complete. So in the act of saying we need to be complete, we might say, okay, we need to tell them the report is available on the county website. We also need to tell them that it's 14 pages long. Oh, and we need to let them know that they can download it either as a PDF or a Word document. And so we're trying to be complete, and what we do is we put together 3 sentences. Now, when we go back, we look and we see we have the report, and we have it, a pronoun referring to the report. So we can see some redundancies that are going on, and we can restructure that to say the 14-page report, so we take 14 pages and we use it as an adjective to describe the report, can be downloaded as a PDF or Word document from the county website. We still are complete. We're still putting all the information in, but we're doing it in a way that's concise. We're getting rid of redundancies and extra words, flipping things around when we need to. Somebody can read that and get all the information they need, and they are more likely to read it because it is shorter and more direct. And so they know that they're going to get the information they need. Find ways to include short words because they're more powerful and they're more clear. So instead of saying utilize, say use. Instead of saying discontinue, say stop. When you say stop, it's very clear on what you mean, what you want. Accumulate, gather. Sometimes we get caught up, and this is what I call like the $10 word. We get caught up on the big words, and sometimes we either have heard other people use it, or we think that maybe it sounds more professional or it sounds more formal. And we're trying to be professional. But what it often does is just blocks communication. You get too many big words in a sentence, even educated people can kind of lose the meaning of the sentence. And it also just isn't as clear. Instead of saying discontinue, say stop. Say stop immediately. Say stop now. So whenever you see long words, ask yourself, is that a word that means something specific to this audience and I need to include it? Or is that a word that I should get rid of and I should replace it with something shorter? So that's the idea of being concise, moving beyond brevity to be concise, complete, yet thinking about economy of words. So we've been complete with the first C. Now we've broken it down to conciseness. And so we've cut out everything we don't need to say. Now we go to the third step, which is to say, okay, I've got my mock-up draft here, my text. Am I really being clear? And clarity means a lot of things. We have to remember that your goal is not to write a letter or an email. Your goal is to communicate knowledge. And you have to say, what is the best way for me to do that? Not just that I wrote all these paragraphs and now I have a letter. Okay, fine, I can send out a letter. And then I'm sitting there frustrated because nobody read the letter and nobody did it. So you say, am I being clear? Now, there are some things that we do in business writing to be clear. We chunk information. We put information in blocks. That's part of that organization. If there's something dealing with a location on our second paragraph and something dealing with a location on our fourth paragraph, we have to ask ourselves, shouldn't those both be together? And maybe we put them in a section called location. So we group information, and then we can figure out what a natural order of that information is, but we want to group that information together. Group that information with those descriptive headers. And so you'll see this a lot in business communication. I have it here. Here's a header, clear. Everything here is going to deal with clear. You know, just by looking at this page, this is one section, this is another section. If you look at it in detail, you'll notice that there's a subhead here, then there's a blank line, and then there's more information, then there's a blank line. So I'm adding in a little bit of white space to help group it. You know that all of these belong together because there's a little bit of a space between them and the item above them. So you get a sense of unity between all of this, but even more so between this and even more so between that. That's why we use single line spacing. We don't use the double spacing. in our letters and memos and emails in business. We group things together. We use a blank line to help add some white space in there. And then if you pay attention closely, you'll notice that there are actually 2 spaces here. So I've used a blank line in between these to give it a little bit of air, a little bit of breathing room, a little bit of white space. It's more friendly to the reader. But I do add more space here because I want to separate these ideas even more. So we're using section headers and we're saying what they are, and then we're chunking our information together. Sometimes that has to do with words, and sometimes it just has to do with how you put the words together on the page. Short paragraphs, you'll notice in business writing, short paragraphs, you have a topic sentence and you say the ideas and then you move on to the next paragraph. It's okay to have a sentence with paragraph with 2 or 3 sentences. That's perfectly fine. It's easier to read. It helps them jump from paragraph to paragraph. It helps them move around a little bit. Don't use jargon. Use concrete words. Be specific. Think about whether you're saying a sentence in an active or a passive way. So sections B and C should be checked for errors. That's a passive sentence. It's not saying who is doing what. Your staff did not meet the sales quota last month. That's active. It's saying your staff. It's sort of pointing the finger. Now, what we have to be careful of, and I give a little tip here, use active for clarity. An active sentence is more clear about who should do what. But there are times, for example, in these 2 sentences, these should actually be flipped around. There are times when you want to be passive because you want more tact. So this is a passive sentence, but it probably should be specific. It should be active. It should say who is doing what. So I might say, you should check this, or the editor must check B and C for errors. It's going to help make sure that the right person checks it, that it's done. So if I were to rewrite these sentences, I would flip them around to be more effective. In this case, this sentence should be active to be more effective. In this case, we have an active sentence that should probably be passive because we want to be careful not to alienate or create bad will with staff, make them feel like they've been called out in front of everybody else. So instead of saying something like, your staff did not meet the sales quota last month, I might say something like, the sales quota was not met last month. It's a passive sentence. It doesn't actually say who is doing what. Everybody kind of knows the quota wasn't met, but I'm not doing it in a negative way that points the finger at some person or department. So pay attention to active versus passive. Are you being clear? Are you being tactful? What are you using and why? Parallel structure, we want to have sentences use some of the same kind of words. So here we say you must process invoices quickly and accurately. A longer way to say that is you must process invoices quickly and you should be accurate. That takes more words and it doesn't allow the rhythm that has the ideas come out as easily for the reader. And they kind of anticipate. So they read quickly and they can kind of anticipate that the next set of words is going to have the same structure, and it helps them see those words, find those words later, remember those words, and act on those words. So that parallel structure, and that's something that you can look in the book under parallel structure and find and learn more about that. Typographical cues. Use bullet lists. Use numeral lists. If there's a specific series that you need to have or a specific number of items, use 1, 2, 3. If there are just some tips in general, use bullets. Use bold, use italic, use all caps. Now, I don't mean all cap an entire sentence, but you might all cap a specific word. Like if you wanted to tell someone that this form should not be used for that, you might want to capitalize just the word not to make sure that it isn't missed when somebody's reading quickly. Underline certain words. Be careful, because if you're underlining in an email or underlining in web text, it could give the person the impression that it's a link, but in memos and letters and printed materials like that, you can certainly use underline. It's going to make sure that people find the important information. If human resources sends out paperwork and they want people to return that paperwork no later than this date, one of the last things on that letter should be, make sure you return your benefits paperwork no later than blah, blah, blah. And no later than blah, blah, blah might be bold. It might be bold and it might be all caps, because you want to make sure if they see nothing else in this letter, they see that date. So we don't want to use these typographical cues on anything. We want to use these typographical cues on important information. We use a bullet list to make sure you must see this. We'll underline something to make sure you must see this. Now, we don't want to overuse them, but we want to find a balance. For example, I wanted you to key on certain words here. because it is, because it is. So I've given them a small underline, quickly and accurately. I wanted to see the words that were parallel. Above, when we talked about the report and the report and its, I used underline. It helps call out certain elements. It helps emphasize the important elements. All of that has to do with clarity. The right words, chunking sentences, using section headers to divide up text, parallel structure. This is where we get into the idea of professional communication. This is the level where you start to say, okay, I've got my ideas down. Now I'm really going to make sure that I am putting them in a way that my reader will read them and my reader will act on them. If you care about your reader, you will do these things. People who don't care about their readers or care about the information they are conveying, they don't take this extra step. And people know it and it shows. Take that extra step. Hone your sentences. Pay attention to the nuances. And then finally, consistency. This goes all over the place. It can be, for example, in the bottom bullet, being consistent with accurate punctuation and grammar. It often means just consistency in things like if you write St. Paul this way, and then in the next sentence you write St. Paul this way. People pick up on those. One here or there isn't a big deal, but once they start to see this isn't consistent here and then it's not consistent here, they start to feel like you're not very detail-oriented, or that you're lazy or messy or sloppy. And it says more about you as a person and your character, and it takes away from your credibility. So whatever else you have in your report, they're already standoffish. They're already wondering, can they trust you? Can they trust you for all the details in the report when you are inconsistent in some of these ways? It also can be problematic in organizations. For example, a lot of companies have something that is maybe officially termed the orientation manual. But everybody in the office calls it the new hire manual, right? The new hire booklet, whatever, because that they're talking about, oh, where's that booklet that we give to the new hires? The problem is, if you were to maybe send a letter out to a new person starting, and you say, please go to this website and take a look at our new hire booklet, and that person goes there and that person's actually looking for the words new hire and all they can see are orientation, there's a disconnect. There's frustration. They're not sure where to go. Be consistent with your language. Be consistent with the punctuation. When we talk about documents and formatting, emails do a certain thing. They look a certain way. They have certain kind of subjects. They have certain kind of signature files. The introduction is done in a certain way, and that is all very different than what would be done with a memo. And you must be consistent with the type of medium that you're using, because there are expectations from a reader. And if you don't match those expectations, it takes away from your credibility. It confuses people. So when you are working on your documents, I don't care what it is. If you are just emailing a friend, ask yourself, have I been complete? Have I told this person all the information? After I've been complete, have I tried to take out all the words that don't need to be there? Have I restructured the sentence? Some of these, cut out modifiers, avoid redundancies, simplify your words. Okay, have I been clear? If I'm asking about a certain date or a certain time, should I call that out in a bullet list, or should I bold that? Should I break up my sentences a little bit more? If it's a long email, should I put section headers in there? If it's an IM, should I be clear and say, first, that I have 2 points for you, and then have one IM that says question number 1, and then after that's answered, say, okay, now I have question number 2. Are we being clear? Are we helping the person along? And then finally, are you being consistent? When you look at these, ask yourself, have I done them? What else could I do? Have I done this and I should do something else? When you see communication that's effective, ask yourself, have they done this? When you see communication that is poor, ask yourself, what didn't they do? And you'll notice that it'll just be second nature. You'll start to develop this sense of, oh, they should have broken this into 2 paragraphs. They should have added a section header here. They probably could have cut this sentence and this sentence out altogether. The subject line was horrible to begin with. And it's not because you're a nitpicky person, but it becomes second nature on how to communicate effectively.